Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. I think we've all seen how the Definitive Edition AI can push deer toward its town center. It saves building a mill and some villager walking time at the expense of a bit of scouting. But how exactly do you get an AI to do that? I asked Promi, who's the AI lead at Forgotten Empire Studios, and he gave me a rundown of where to look for the relevant part of the AI script and the main idea behind what's going on. First of all, maybe the most complex looking part are the various ways to activate pushing deer as a goal. There are several different ways it can be triggered depending on the game time, number of sheep, number of boar, whether it considers itself a flank player, and whether the scout is in what's called the home exploration phase of scouting. Suffice it to say, there are multiple conditions that can trigger deer pushing. Once it's decided that that's what it's going to do, first it picks a deer and grabs game information about the deer's position as a set of coordinates. It also grabs the town center location and does a bit of math to turn everything into precise coordinates. Basically, instead of working with whole tiles, it's now working with coordinates in hundredths of a tile. So it knows with a lot more precision where the deer is exactly on the map. That's going to be important so it can get the scout in just the right spot. Next, it draws a line from the deer to the town center and finds a point 3/4 of a tile behind the deer. This is where it's going to send the scout. A bit more technically, it's using interpolation, which normally finds a point between two things. In this case, it's being asked to find a point -75 closer to the town center, meaning it'll extend the line and extrapolate a point that's slightly further away. Of course, the number 75 corresponds to 3/4 of a tile because we're working in precise coordinates, meaning we're still dealing with hundredths of each tile. As a side note, notice the vast majority of instructions here start with UP. That stands for user patch, which added a lot of new options for scripters to use. These weren't available in the original game or HD, but are now at least mostly working in Definitive Edition. That's a big part of what allows the Definitive Edition and other AIs like Barbarian on user patch to play at a much higher level than some of the older AIs. So now that the AI has pinpointed a location 3/4 of a tile behind the deer from the perspective of the town center, it sends a scout to that point. It's close enough to cause the deer to run away, and as it does, the script just repeats that process. It's a clever solution, as all you really need to do is keep having the scout maintain its distance just behind the deer, and it'll look like it's pushing it toward the town center with a purpose. As you can see though, the actual steps just involve looking up information, extrapolating a point, and sending the scout to it. One obvious downside to this method is that it's not creating a route from the deer to the town center, it's only pushing it in a straight line. That means it can get confused if there's an obstruction in the way or if it can't reach the point behind the deer that it's aiming for. Either situation can cause the entire process to bug out, and even having buildings around with narrow passageways can lead it on a wild goose chase, as it were. Obviously, the scout doesn't really know the deer or ostrich is there, it's just chasing after a point slightly behind it. Something funny that can also happen on occasion is there's nothing specific to a scout cavalry here. It's just grabbing whatever the AI considers its scout unit, so if it's lost its scout cavalry, something else can fill that role. Let's say its scout has successfully pushed the deer in though. At that point, we want some villagers to finish it off. When the deer is within 5 tiles of the town center, some nearby villagers on food are assigned to hunt it. Once the deer goes down, it simply resets the process and the scout chooses another deer to push if the other conditions are still met. So that's how the AI pushes deer in a nutshell. It's pretty simple in theory, but you can see even a fairly straightforward instruction like this takes 50 or more lines of code to execute. The most impressive part for me is how well it does at blocking the deer that try to run back. The 3/4 tile distance between them is just enough that it halts the animal without having the scout give any ground. Shout out to Promi for explaining the process to me, and also to Interlepus, who has a great beginner tutorial playlist on AI scripting. I just watched it over the weekend, and if you have any interest at all in either understanding or creating your own AI script, it's a great introduction, and I'll link that along with some other good resources below. I'll also include a couple of links below to interviews with Promi that I've had in the past, where we talked about other AI behaviors and the process of making it. That's all for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.